One of the most iconic movies of the 80s almost fell apart before the cameras even stopped rolling. The lead actor's method acting was so extreme that the director nearly fired him mid production. The entire script was written in a single weekend by a guy who locked himself in a room and emerged with pure teenage gold. The film's most memorable moment, that triumphant fist bump that became burned into pop culture, was completely improvised, made up on the spot. And that library you remember so vividly, it wasn't a library at all. It was a sweltering gymnasium that nearly cooked the cast alive. This is the chaotic, rebellious, and absolutely wild story of how five kids in detention became the voice of a generation. Here are 24 insane facts about the Breakfast Club you won't believe. Fact 1: The Abandoned School. Let's start with the location because nothing about this production was normal from day one. The Breakfast Club was filmed inside Main North High School in Des Plaines, Illinois, a real school that had been shut down just 3 years earlier. Opened in 1970, it closed in 1981 due to declining enrollment. When John Hughes walked through those empty halls in 1984, he found exactly what he needed: authentic teenage silence frozen in time. The empty lockers, the echoing corridors, the sense of abandonment. It gave the film a haunting authenticity you can feel in every scene. Today, the building serves as headquarters for the Illinois State Police. But if you visit, there's still a small shrine to the film at the bottom of a stairwell, a framed poster, and a sign that reads, "The film The Breakfast Club was filmed in our building." Fact 2: The Library from Hell. But here's where it gets interesting. That iconic library, where all the magic happens, completely fake and a nightmare to film in. The real library at Main North was way too small and uninspiring for the emotional weight Hughes had planned. So the production crew did something bold. They built a massive library set inside the school's gymnasium. They went all out, added skylights, built a mezzanine, created study rooms, even stocked the shelves with donated books from the Chicago Public Library. When you watch Bender walk across tables or see Claire sitting silently staring at her nails, they're all performing inside a gym, pretending to be a library. The illusion was flawless on screen. Off screen, total misery. That gym had no air conditioning, and with massive stage lights blazing overhead, the temperature regularly hit brutal levels. Cast members remembered being drenched in sweat between takes, trapped in what felt like a detention sauna. But here's the thing: the discomfort actually helped. That claustrophobic tension you feel watching the film, the restless body language, the flushed faces, the feeling of being trapped, part of it was genuine. They weren't just acting uncomfortable, they were living it. Sometimes the best performances come from making actors genuinely miserable. Fact 3: The impossible budget. And Hughes achieved all of this on an absurdly tiny budget. The Breakfast Club was made for less than $1 million. In Hollywood terms, even in 1984, that was nothing. Most of the money went to securing the cast and building that library set. The rest? Creative scrapping. Wardrobes were mostly pulled from the actors' real closets. Lighting rigs were reused from previous Universal productions. Some background extras were local students roped in for authenticity. The limitation turned out to be a creative blessing. Without flash or spectacle to fall back on, Hughes leaned into character development, raw emotion, and tight storytelling. The movie grossed over 51.5 million worldwide, making it one of the most profitable teen films ever made. It proved you didn't need a blockbuster budget to create something unforgettable. You just needed heart, honesty, and a little rebellion. Fact 4: The casting chaos. But the cast you know and love, that almost didn't happen. Emilio Estevez was originally supposed to play John Bender, the chain smoking rebel in the trench coat. But there was a problem. Hughes couldn't find anyone who could convincingly play the jock. He needed someone who looked physically imposing, but could also show vulnerability beneath the surface. So, in a last minute casting pivot, Estevez was swapped into the role of Andrew Clark, the wrestler, and the production scrambled to find someone new to play Bender. Enter John Cusack, who actually had the part first. Cusack auditioned multiple times, even traveling between Chicago and Los Angeles to nail the role, but Hughes changed his mind before filming began. He decided Cusack didn't have the menace, the intimidation factor he needed. That's when Judd Nelson walked into the room. Nelson's audition was legendary for all the wrong reasons. He threw his Walkman on the floor, left the music blasting, and read for the role, while everyone in the waiting room watched in stunned silence. Ali Sheedy later remembered feeling dazzled by him. He was graceful, beautiful, and very dark. He didn't stick to anything Hughes wrote. He went off on his own riff, all over the place. And Hughes saw exactly what he needed. That raw confrontational energy was perfect for Bender. But other actors were in the mix too. Nicolas Cage was considered, but the production couldn't afford his salary. This was pre-Face Off Cage, but even then, he was already too expensive for the modest budget. Can you imagine Cage fist bumping off the football field? Chaotic, manic, absolutely wrong for the moment. Even Carl the janitor wasn't supposed to be John Capellas. Rick Moranis was originally cast in the role, but Moranis showed up to set with a drastically different vision: gold teeth, a thick Russian accent, and keys dangling provocatively from a chain. He wanted to play Carl as a broad comedic character, straight out of SCTV. Producer Ned Tannen took one look at the footage and shut it down immediately. The Russian caricature would pull audiences completely out of what was meant to be a serious movie. Capellos, who had just worked with Hughes on 16 Candles, stepped in and brought exactly what the film needed. He made Carl more than comic relief. He became the voice of forgotten glory, the reminder that teenage status fades fast. Fact 5. Ringwald's power play. And then there's Molly Ringwald, who was already Hughes' muse after 16 Candles. She was written into the script, but not for the role you know. Ringwald wanted to play Allison, the misunderstood misfit. She felt the character was more interesting, more layered, with real emotional grit. But Hughes had a clear vision. He believed Ringwald's on-screen presence perfectly embodied Claire's refined exterior, and that casting her as the popular girl would make her emotional unraveling more impactful. He refused to budge, and the role of Allison went to Ali Sheedy. This created real tension on set. Ringwald reportedly stayed distant from the rest of the cast during filming, which only fueled the authenticity of Claire's isolation. That discomfort wasn't just acting, it was personal. And sometimes the best directing is knowing how to weaponize that tension. Fact 6. The undercover mission. But if you think that's intense, wait until you hear about Judd Nelson's preparation. Before filming even began, Nelson went full method. At age 24, he went undercover at a local Chicago high school and convinced teenagers that he was a legitimate student. He told them his dad was in jail. He bought beer for underage kids with his fake ID. They hung out at his hotel room, and when they asked why he was staying there instead of at home, he fed them the prison dad story. This was his research for playing Bender. Peak 1980s method acting. No boundaries, no rules, no consideration for the ethics or legality of buying alcohol for minors. Just pure reckless commitment to the craft. Fact 7. The method acting meltdown. And Nelson didn't stop when filming started. He stayed in character even when the cameras weren't rolling, deliberately provoking his co-stars to keep the tension authentic. He sneered at the crew, teased relentlessly, and most controversially, harassed Molly Ringwald to maintain their on-screen dynamic. At first, Hughes saw this as dedication, but Nelson's behavior eventually crossed too many lines, and the complaints piled up. John Hughes was furious. He seriously considered firing Nelson mid-production and replacing him. The rest of the cast pushed back, defending Nelson's dedication to the role. Even though he was obnoxious, they knew his method acting was giving the film its raw, edgy power. The person who ultimately saved Nelson's job Paul Gleason, the guy playing Principal Vernon. Gleason stepped in and defended Nelson to Hughes, calling him a good actor just trying to get into character. The irony is perfect. The authority figure saved the rebel from getting expelled. Hughes reluctantly let Nelson stay, but the damage was done. The two never worked together again. Nelson's behavior nearly derailed the movie behind the scenes, but it also made Bender unforgettable on screen. That simmering hostility, that sense he might snap at any moment, it wasn't just acting, it was real. Fact 8. The Weekend Sprint. So, where did this chaotic masterpiece even come from? Let's talk about the script. John Hughes wrote the first draft of The Breakfast Club in just 2 days, July 4th and 5th, 1982. He locked himself away over a weekend in a non-stop creative sprint. No outlines, no writing team, just pure inspiration fueled by coffee and British punk music. When he emerged, he had a nearly complete version of what would become one of the most beloved teen films in history. During rehearsals, Anthony Michael Hall and Emilio Estevez asked him, "First draft, how many drafts do you have?" Hughes replied, "A few. Why?" They wanted to read them all, fascinated by his process. That early draft didn't change much. Aside from studio mandated trims and tonal adjustments, the script Hughes handed in was largely what ended up on screen. It speaks to how deeply he understood teenage psychology. He didn't need months of research. He just remembered what it felt like to be 17, misunderstood, and angry at the world. But before it was The Breakfast Club, it had the worst title imaginable, The Lunch Bunch. I'm serious. This generation defining teen drama almost got named like a cafeteria combo platter. The Lunch Bunch sounds like a PBS kids show where the biggest conflict is running out of pudding cups, or maybe a training video for new lunch ladies. Thankfully, Hughes swapped it after hearing actual Chicago area students use the term breakfast club for Saturday morning detention. Students at New Trier High School called themselves that sarcastically. They had to show up early, often without eating, for hours of punishment, while the rest of the world enjoyed their weekend. Hughes, a native of the Chicago suburbs, heard it through friends' kids and recognized it immediately. Informal, ironic, strangely profound, that tiny change transformed the movie from a punchline into a cultural anthem. Fact 9. The Darkness They Cut. But the film you know isn't the film Hughes originally wrote. Early drafts were much darker, digging deeper into trauma, abuse, and isolation. In one version, Bender was heavily implied to be physically abused by his father, not just verbally. Claire's storyline had scenes hinting at disordered eating. Allison's character was far more withdrawn, possibly dealing with suicidal thoughts. Brian's implied academic pressure led to a mental health breakdown that wasn't softened by humor or a tidy ending. Studio executives were nervous. They wanted a movie teens would relate to, not one that might send them spiraling. So Hughes was asked to tone it down, rewrite scenes, and remove the more troubling elements. What we got instead was more balanced, still raw, still emotional, but with just enough lightness to keep it from being a tragedy. But traces of that darker version remain if you know where to look, especially in Bender's scars and Allison's silence. And speaking of dark content that was removed, there was one subplot that almost made it in, but got cut before filming even started. In early drafts, Principal Vernon wasn't just a strict disciplinarian, he was a literal voyeur. Hughes wrote a scene where Vernon spies through a peephole in the women's locker room to watch a teacher swimming naked. Because apparently grumpy authority figure wasn't enough, he had to be a peeping Tom too. Molly Ringwald took one look at the script and said nope. Along with Ali Sheedy and producer Michelle Manning, she convinced Hughes to scrap it before filming. Ringwald later wrote about it in The New Yorker, acknowledging some of Hughes's blind spots when it came to writing women and power dynamics. She saved the movie from becoming a lawsuit waiting to happen. Fact 10. The MPAA battle. The studio's battles with controversial content didn't end there. Even after cutting the Peeping Tom subplot, the film still walked a dangerous line. Bender's crude gesture under the library table, picking up Clara's skirt, nearly earned the film an R rating from the MPAA. An R rating would have severely limited its reach among the very audience it was meant for, teenagers. Hughes argued that the scene revealed Bender's immaturity and discomfort with intimacy, not glorified it. The studio made small cuts and edits to soften the moment, eventually getting the PG-13 they needed. But the controversy didn't end there. Molly Ringwald would later criticize it as one of the film's more troubling moments in hindsight, especially through today's cultural lens. Even with the edits, the moment remains uncomfortable, and intentionally so. Fact 11. The confession scene that almost died. But the studio didn't just have issues with what was in the script. They also wanted to cut the best part, the emotional confession scene, where each teen spills why they're in detention, was nearly axed entirely. Studio executives thought it was too slow, too talky, not cinematic. Nearly 10 uninterrupted minutes of kids just sitting in a circle, talking. They argued it stalled the movie's momentum. Hughes fought for it hard. He believed the real drama wasn't in detention antics or hallway chases, but in watching these five stereotypes break down in real time. That moment of shared vulnerability was the entire point of the film. Hughes refused to compromise, even threatening to walk away from the project if it was cut. And thank God he did. That scene gave the movie its emotional core. It's where the characters stop being archetypes and start being people. Without that moment, The Breakfast Club would have been just another teen comedy. Instead, it became something deeper, something timeless. And here's the twist: that raw confession circle was largely improvised. Hughes told the actors to ad lib, drawing from their own memories of pressure, parents, and teenage loneliness. No polished dialogue, just five young performers pulling from real pain. The result was raw, uneven, and painfully real, exactly like adolescence. This wasn't the only improvisation that saved the movie. Remember the dance scene, that iconic chaotic montage where each character cuts loose in their own bizarre way. That was also not in the script. If you're enjoying these wild behind the scenes stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the movies that shape cinema. We've got plenty more chaos coming your way. Fact 12. The dance nobody wanted. Hughes noticed the cast goofing around between takes, blasting music in the gym, and dancing like nobody was watching. He recognized the spontaneity and thought it captured something raw about teenage energy. So he asked them to recreate it for the cameras. But not everyone was thrilled. Judd Nelson reportedly hated the idea, calling it cheesy and out of character for Bender. He even tried to sit the scene out. Hughes ended up compromising. Bender's dance is noticeably more subdued, shot mostly in silhouette. Even so, the scene became a defining image of the film. It's chaotic, cathartic, and somehow fits perfectly. It's not polished or choreographed, and that's exactly why it works. It's just five kids trapped in a school, shedding their armor for a minute. Fact 13. The fist pump. And then there's the ending, that final moment. John Bender walking across the football field, raising his fist to the sky as "Don't You Forget About Me" blares, is one of the most iconic endings in movie history. But here's the kicker: it wasn't in the script. It happened almost by accident. Originally, Bender was just supposed to walk off into the distance. No music cue, no fist pump, no freeze frame. But Judd Nelson, still deep in character, spontaneously threw up his fist during one of the last takes. Half defiant, half triumphant, John Hughes recognized gold when he saw it. It captured everything the character had been through without saying a single word. Even the decision to freeze frame on that image came later in the editing room. Hughes realized it was the perfect punctuation mark, raw, rebellious, and unforgettable, and that simple gesture became the symbol of the entire film. One improvised movement, one split-second decision became cinema history. Fact 14. The song they didn't want to record. Now let's talk about that song, because "Don't You Forget About Me" is now inseparable from The Breakfast Club. But Simple Minds didn't want to record it and almost passed on the biggest hit of their career. Producer Keith Forsey co-wrote the track specifically for the movie and pitched it to several big-name artists first. Brian Ferry turned it down. He was busy working on his album Boys and Girls. And there's been debate about Billy Idol. Multiple sources claim he was offered the song and passed, but Idol himself tweeted in 2013 that it was never offered to him. When Forsey approached Simple Minds, they weren't interested either. Singer Jim Kerr thought the lyrics were too sentimental, and the band only wanted to perform their own material. The band's manager even arranged a private screening of the film to change their minds. They still said no. Enter Chrissie Hynde of The Pretenders, Jim Kerr's wife at the time. She basically told him, just record the damn song, and he finally agreed. But even after agreeing, Simple Minds treated it like a burden. They knocked it out in one take, 3 to 4 hours total, with minimal enthusiasm. They recorded it, forgot about it, ironically fitting for a song begging not to be forgotten, and moved on to their next album. But when the film exploded in popularity, so did the song. It shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming Simple Minds' biggest US hit ever. The track they nearly passed on became the defining anthem of their career, and that slow-motion fist bump from Bender as the song plays, pure spontaneous magic. It cemented the song's place in pop culture forever. Fact 15. Parmesan dandruff. Alright, let's get into the weird details that make this movie so memorable. Remember Allison's iconic moment when she shakes white flakes onto her drawing? That dandruff wasn't dandruff at all, it was Parmesan cheese. Real dandruff wouldn't show up on camera, and flour clumped up under the hot lights, so the crew raided the kitchen instead, because nothing says teen rebellion quite like sprinkling pasta garnish on your art project. And the infamous weed smoking scene? The cast wasn't actually lighting up marijuana. They were smoking oregano, a common Hollywood stand-in during the 1980s when Nancy Reagan was everywhere, telling everyone to just say no. It gave off the right amount of smoke, looked believable on camera, and let the actors improvise their goofy stoner bonding without breaking any rules. Hollywood's been lying to you this whole time. That's not dandruff, that's dinner. That's not weed, it's spaghetti seasoning. Fact 16. The real family. But some things in the movie were very real. Remember the opening scene when Brian gets dropped off for detention and his mom is scolding him about his future? That's not a hired actress. That's Anthony Michael Hall's real mother, Mercedes Hall. And sitting next to her, giving Brian a sideways look, that's his actual half-sister, Mary Christian. John Hughes loved to blur the line between reality and fiction. He felt that using Hall's real family would ground Brian's character, making him more relatable and believable. And it worked. The awkward, nagging parent energy wasn't acted. It was the real deal. It's a small touch that shows how much thought Hughes put into even the quietest moments. Fact 17. Hughes' silent cameo. And speaking of parents, at the very end of the film, when Brian gets picked up after detention, that's John Hughes himself behind the wheel, silently playing Brian's dad. That's right, the man who wrote every teenager's angst into being also played the disappointed parent. Talk about covering both sides of the generation gap. It's the ultimate director flex. Write the definitive teen angst movie, then show up to silently judge your own characters. Fact 18. Carl's secret past. But my favorite tiny detail? Look closely at the opening credits. There's a wall plaque naming Carl the janitor as Shermer High's Man of the Year 1969. Carl peaked the same year as Woodstock and the moon landing. Somewhere between bell bottoms and disco, Carl was the guy everyone looked up to. Now he's pushing a broom. Hughes planted that tiny detail to remind us that teenage glory fades fast. Carl wasn't always the janitor. He was once celebrated, admired, maybe even destined for greatness. It makes Carl's later speech about adults forgetting their teenage selves land even deeper, both on screen and off. Carl embodied a lesson nobody wants to learn. Life comes at you fast, and sometimes it hands you a mop. Fact 19. the Jungian blueprint. And here's something most people don't know. Those five stereotypes, the brain, the athlete, the basket case, the princess, and the criminal, weren't pulled out of thin air. Hughes built each one around Carl Jung's theory of personality archetypes. Brian represents the intellect and the pressure to perform. Claire embodies the persona, the mask we wear to fit in. Bender is the shadow, the dark, repressed side. Allison channels the mystic, the misunderstood outcast. And Andrew is the hero archetype, strong and competitive, but trapped by expectations. They're not just high school kids, they're stand ins for parts of ourselves. That's why the characters resonate so deeply, even decades later. They weren't built to be trendy, they were built to be timeless. Fact 20: The Growth Spurt. And while we're talking about the cast, here's a bizarre detail. Anthony Michael Hall literally grew during filming. When rehearsal started, Judd Nelson was a couple inches taller than Hall. But by the time they wrapped, Hall had sprouted past him. Nelson later joked, "I'd already begun writing letters to geneticists." For Hughes, the timing was accidentally brilliant. Hall's awkward, lanky transformation mirrored Brian's vulnerability, the brain trying to hold it together while his body refused to cooperate. Method growing? Not intentional, but it worked. Fact 21: In character lunches. To keep the emotional chemistry real, Hughes encouraged the cast to stay in character even during breaks, and they took it seriously, especially during lunch. Claire dined on sushi. Andrew scarfed down protein packed meals. Brian nervously poked at his food while talking about grades. Allison dumped sugary cereal and sandwich fillings into a chaotic pile, even off camera, and Bender was usually off brooding somewhere alone. What started as a quirky acting exercise quickly turned intense. These in character lunches led to real arguments and emotional tension, exactly like the characters in the film. When it was time to shoot emotional scenes, that pent up friction spilled naturally onto the screen. Fact 22: The lost footage. But not everything shot made it into the final film. In fact, there's a version of The Breakfast Club that no one has fully seen, though some of it finally resurfaced decades later. Over 50 minutes of footage was shot and then cut from the final release. The initial cut ran 150 minutes. Hughes originally envisioned a much longer film packed with deeper character moments and additional scenes that fleshed out the students' backstories. Some reports suggest we would have seen more about Allison's home life, more on Bender's abuse, and even a romantic subplot between Claire and Brian. At one point, Hughes considered releasing an extended version, but over the years, the extra footage was misplaced, possibly even destroyed. Universal has confirmed that it no longer has the full reels, and Hughes never publicly showed them before his passing in 2009. It's one of the great lost treasures of 1980s cinema, a version of The Breakfast Club that went even deeper and darker than the film we know today. But in 2017, some of that lost treasure resurfaced. The Criterion Collection Blu-ray edition dropped 50 minutes of never-before-seen footage. Buried in that treasure trove was a bathroom scene between Claire and Allison that had been cut for over 30 years. Claire criticizes Allison for eating chips in the bathroom right after washing her hands, inches away from a live toilet. Allison, being Allison, takes a chip that fell in the sink, uses a paper towel to pick it up, and calmly eats it before walking away. Claire mutters, "This is not correct." Fans already loved Allison's Captain Crunch and Pixie Stick sandwich, but this deleted snack shaming duel took her weirdness to a whole other level. For 3 decades, this footage was locked away, and when it finally dropped, it proved that even The Breakfast Club's deleted scenes had more bite than most movies' final cuts. Fact 23: The sequel that never happened. After the massive success of The Breakfast Club, Universal Studios was ready to cash in on a sequel, and surprisingly, John Hughes was open to the idea, at least at first. He floated a concept that would revisit the characters 10 years later, exploring how their lives had changed since that one unforgettable Saturday in detention. But the cast wasn't interested. Judd Nelson, in particular, flatly refused to work with Hughes again after their on-set clashes. Molly Ringwald wasn't on board either, feeling the story was complete and didn't need a follow-up. Even Anthony Michael Hall hesitated, worried a sequel would cheapen the emotional impact of the original. Hughes took the hint and dropped the idea, later stating in interviews that a sequel would have felt phony. He understood that part of the magic was not knowing what happened after the credits rolled. Did Claire and Bender stay together? Did the friendships last? We never find out. And maybe that's the point. It's a rare case in Hollywood where restraint won over profit. No reboots, no spin offs, no streaming revival, just one perfect self contained story. Fact 24: filming in sequence. One final detail that made this movie special: Hughes insisted on filming the entire movie in chronological order. In Hollywood, shooting in sequence is rare. Most films are shot out of order to save time and money. But Hughes wanted the emotional evolution of the characters to be real. The cast started the movie not just as strangers on screen, but as near strangers in real life. And just like their characters, they gradually bonded, argued, and opened up over time. You can actually see it happen. The awkward body language in the early scenes slowly melts away into a kind of reluctant closeness by the end. This method also helped the actors stay emotionally in sync, each moment built on the last without needing to force feelings out of order. The Breakfast Club wasn't supposed to be a cultural milestone. It had no explosions, no big stars, and barely left one room. It was shot in an abandoned school on a shoestring budget, in a fake library built inside a sweltering gymnasium. The script was written in 2 days. The director nearly fired his lead actor for being too method. The studio wanted to cut the emotional heart of the film. The actors improvised the most iconic moments. The band didn't want to record the song that became its anthem. And somehow, against all odds, it cracked open the teenage soul and put it on film, raw, honest, and unforgettable. What makes it timeless isn't just the music or the quotes, it's the weird little details. The improvised fist pump, the undercover high school research, the Parmesan cheese dandruff, the cast tensions that made the performances real, the darker version we never saw, the sequel they wisely refused to make, whether you were the brain, the athlete, the basket case, the princess, or the criminal, or maybe a little bit of all five. This film found a way to speak to you, and decades later, it still does. So, have you watched The Breakfast Club yet? Tell us in the comments what you think about it and which of these facts you already knew and what surprised you most. If you haven't, go watch it when you get the chance and then come back to tell us about it. And if you like this video, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into films that changed everything. Thanks for watching.